This is Proxy Countdown. Welcome to the big show for the week of March 11th, 2024, alongside my tag team partner, Matt Mascardi. I'm Damian Rollis. On today's countdown, a boomerang CEO at a sportswear company, a director named Joe who refuses to leave LKQ, Sonos shareholders don't like their CEO, Qualcomm shareholders asleep at the wheel, and on the big vote, the boys are wrestling at Disney. Start a trade wire. A boomerang CEO alert at Under Armour. Founder Kevin Plank is back at the job. Although, is there a better named CEO for a sportswear company than Plank? Stephanie Lenart, who lasted 13 months, will leave with $3 million in cash, a 2024 bonus, full vesting of sign-on equity worth $7 million, continued COBRA benefits for 2 years, and the remaining rent on her apartment lease in Baltimore. Not bad. In connection with his appointment as CEO, Kevin will hand chair duties to Mohammed El Arian. It's also worth noting that director Carolyn Everson has been on the board of two high-profile boomerang CEO events, on the board of Disney with Bob Iger, and now on the board with Under Armour with Kevin Plank.
But let's be clear, Kevin Plank has controlling shareholdership.
Controlling vote, controlling influence, has it all. So
it's not really comparable, because in one place, Kevin Plank just says, get out, and wins. And at the other place, Bob Iger says, get out, and she has the appearance of being able to do something.
She's still at a place, two places that scratch their heads a lot when the succession planning committee meets. Next story, they can't quit Joseph Holston at LKQ Corporation. He's been a CEO, a director, a vice chair, a co-CEO, a board chair, chairman emeritus, and now, drumroll please, a board observer. He won't vote. He won't have fiduciary duties, but he will sit there and stare at the other directors and wink once for vote no and wink twice for vote yes. We're seeing a lot of this.
What a job.
Yeah.
What a job.
I don't like these because as far as our data is concerned, it's hard to know. Do you include them in the database? Do you exclude them? But their influence is important because they're there. They're at the meetings.
I mean, I think the fact that they're allowed in the room at all means they have influence, right?
Yeah.
Like they want them there. They value their input. They must have influence, and it's hard to capture.
It's like a public corporation cheat code, and I don't think it should be allowed. I think you're either an elected director or you're gone. You're out.
I mean, who shouldn't be a board observer at this point?
Right.
My kids should go to board meetings. Why not?
I didn't say that. Bill Brown is the new CEO at 3M Company. He is replacing Michael Roman, who will be transitioning to an executive chair role. The new CEO's Golden Hello package is valued at $17 million. That's $3 million in cash and $14 million in equity. Also, the board has waived the mandatory retirement age of 65 years for both Bill Brown and Michael Roman. And finally, at Comtech Telecommunications, they have terminated CEO Ken Peterman after less than 2 years on the job for cause due to conduct unrelated to Comtech's business strategy, financial results, or previously filed financial statements. What that means, nobody knows. As usual, despite being a publicly traded company, there is seemingly no obligation to tell shareholders why the hell the CEO is just fired after less than 2 years on the job, other than a massive Easter egg of a hint saying that we fired him for a reason. For terrible conduct, but we're not going to tell you why. That's terrible.
This is better than stepping down for personal reasons. At least this is a little bit more than that.
Just tell us. Let's move over to our proxy cage matches. In this space, we usually update the three-way proxy cage match going over at Disney, but seeing as Disney is the subject of the big vote this week, let's focus on a different kind of proxy cage match. I haven't heard this one before. Saba Capital Management has nominated 7 directors for election to the boards of 10 BlackRock closed-end funds at their respective 2024 annual meetings. Additionally, Saba has filed a lawsuit against the BlackRock ESG Capital Allocation Term Trust for adopting an illegal entrenchment bylaw. The entrenchment bylaw says that any share not voted in a contested election is counted as a vote for BlackRock. How about that one? BlackRock doing some
anti-ESG play?
I don't know what this is. It sounds like BlackRock is up to some bad ESG in its ESG fund. But no, I don't think this is an anti-ESG, anti-woke company. It's just an investment company, Saba Capital Management. I think they just don't like the directors of some of these BlackRock closed-end funds. We never talk about these. They file normally. I see their voting records all the time in the SEC, but we just, it's something we just don't talk about, nor should we.
I might have to follow up on this and figure out why.
Let's move on. Moving over to our vote results table at small cap companies. I picked this first company just because I like the name. At Natural Grocers by Vitamin Cottage.
Wait, that's not the company name,
Yeah,
is
that's
it?
the company name. Natural Grocers by Vitamin Cottage. 73% of shareholders without the last name Isley voted to remove sibling directors Heather and Kemper Isley.
Oh. What did the directors with the name Isley vote?
I'm hoping they voted for themselves. Let's move over to another company. 26% of all voters at Maximus. Now, that's a good name. I mean, come on.
That's way better.
Natural Grocers by Vitamin Cottage or Maximus.
Yeah. What is a Vitamin Cottage? Is that what place where one lives?
Hansel and Gretel. 26% of all votes at Maximus said yes to a labor rights shareholder proposal asking for a third-party assessment on the company's commitment to freedom of association and collective bargaining rights. The adjusted, I'm calling this a new name here. The adjusted non-ESG skeptic vote shows a majority support, 50%, 50.3%. So when you eliminate all the institutional investors, I call those the ESG skeptics. Shareholders voted to pass that. And at Sonos, once again, when you do the adjustment, non-ESG skeptic vote came to 40% against CEO Patrick Spence.
Can I ask a question, actually?
Yeah.
Because Maximus is a small cap. They're a $5 billion cap, I think. Maybe a mid cap. They're somewhere in that range. But someone took the effort to file a shareholder proposal looking for a third-party assessment of labor rights at Maximus,
Right.
knowing that Maximus was a dual-class company where you weren't going to win the proposal. Meanwhile, there are 2,000 companies in the United States where you could file a proposal and get a report potentially. I don't understand the process here.
Hey, they fought a CEO and founder, Howard Schultz, whose biggest thing in life is being anti-union, anti-labor. So they're winning concessions there.
It's also one share, one vote. Why would you choose a small cap company to go after that's not even possible to win?
And at large cap companies, shareholders are either happy or not paying attention or rubber stamping everything management does. I call this the if BlackRock jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you proxy voting standard. I'm going to repeat that.
Is that a new ISS standard?
If BlackRock jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge, would you? Yes, this is part of the ISS suite of voting recommendations. So nothing to report at Nordson and nothing really to report at Qualcomm other than the fact that 88% of shareholders voted to support two anti-shareholder proposals, one on officer exculpation and another on essentially muting shareholder lawsuits by allowing them to be tried in federal court and not in the state of Delaware.
What are we doing, people? What's the point?
Absolutely asleep at the wheel.
Why be a shareholder? Why even have a right?
All right, let's move over to the big votes. Speaking of shareholders and rights, although we covered in the past, shareholders at Disney are selling their votes for, I think, 20 cents a vote. But this is a big one, Matt. I know you've been wrestling with this all week. This is the shareholder vote, the annual meeting at the Walt Disney Company, April 3rd, 2024. There's a lot to cover here because, first of all, you have the Disney slate of directors, but you also have two competing slates of directors. One from Trian Management featuring Nelson Peltz, one from Blackwell's Capital featuring a bunch of people.
I like that they're featuring like a rap artist.
Yeah. So let me just start off with some observations, and I'll let the conversation unfold from there. First of all, I want to say this about Disney. One of the greatest, their female influence percentage, according to our data, is at 42%, which is incredible, compared to the industry average, which is at 14%.
Yeah, and
hats off to Disney for this. Hats off to Disney.
This is down because Susan Arnold was the chairwoman, and she had actually Disney was one of a handful of companies in the entire world that didn't have a female founder who's sitting on the board, but or family member, but had a majority female influence on the board. One of very, very few.
And we have wondered in the past if this makes them a target in ESG circles, right? For the anti-ESG, the MAGA investor types, do they hate Disney because it's so much female leadership? I don't know. The other thing I want to say here, which is pretty outstanding and it makes them an outlier in media, is that in the media industry, the average insider influence comes to 75%, which means that 75% of the board is controlled by insiders.
Yeah.
At Disney, that number is only 8%, and that's what leads me to the big story here, and that's this. I looked at all of the peers in media, according to Disney, their own peers: Comcast, Meta Platforms, Netflix, Paramount Global, Fox, Amazon, Alphabet. All of those companies are off limits to activist investors. All of them are controlled by a single entity, or in the case of Alphabet, it's two entities, Sergey Brin and Larry Page, that control over 50% of the influence, right? And at Fox, it's as high as 81% controlled by Lachlan Murdoch. But effectively, all of these media companies are out of play for activist investors, okay? And why do I mention this? Because what we have seen a lot, anecdotally speaking, although I'm sure we could gather the data on this, is that billionaires and their egos love to buy and be a part of media companies.
Yeah, megaphones. They love a megaphone.
Whether it's Twitter or the Washington Post or Disney, they need this. They need to be seen. They need to be heard. They need their opinions, whether they have media knowledge or not, to be invalidated by the public, because the data shows, Matt, that there are only two available democracies other than Disney that an activist investor could attack. That's one of those is Apple, and I laugh at that because
that's ridiculous.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Apple.
I tried and got a buyback, but it's still ridiculous.
Okay, yeah. Nelson Peltz is not going to go after Apple. And the other one is Warner Brothers Discovery. And if you look at the corporate history of Warner Brothers Discovery, it is this kaleidoscope of aging Scotch tape. It is the corporate structure here is bizarre. So I don't know why anyone would attack it. And more importantly, when I say Warner Brothers Discovery, does it give you a sense of nostalgic Americana?
Like a tingle? No.
Yeah.
No, it does not.
So to me, and I've been struggling with this for about a month, but I finally landed on this thought, is that this war between, I really think it's mostly the wars between Trian, whatever, between Nelson Peltz and Disney, and you add in Blackwell, so we'll get to that later. This war really is not about Disney. I've been scratching my head being like, why are they coming after Disney? What needs to be fixed there? I think it's just about the billionaire's fascination with being famous and getting involved with media. I think that's it.
Look, I actually, so that segues, I want to start this with the conversation because we talked for like an hour and a half yesterday about this. And even the names of the activists' campaigns betray what everybody sort of wants out of this, right? Disney's got its own campaign to vote for its slate. It's just called Vote Disney, right? And they're going to talk about how great
makes
they
sense.
are.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Blackwell's has set out something called the future of Disney, and Blackwell's,
too, sure.
to their credit, is focused largely on what do the next 10 years look like for Disney. But Nelson Peltz and Tryon named it Restore the Magic.
Yeah.
It's like we want to go back to 1997 or 2006 when Avengers were great and Jay Rasulo, who's a Peltz nominee, was CFO.
Which is odd because considering all the achievements that Bob Iger has made in the last 2 decades, which are considerable, including the recent one. What they bought video games company Epic.
They just took a stake in Epic Games. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that I wouldn't want to go back to. I wouldn't want to go back to the 90s. Like I don't know why we're getting rid of all of the achievements that Bob Iger has achieved. But let me just say this. First of all, and we'll talk about the competing slates later, because the Tryon slate is laughable. The directors they're putting up, but the Blackwell slate I don't actually hate. I mean, I could argue.
It's an endorsement.
I could argue that I don't, 100% love it. I don't mind what Blackwell's is putting up. I don't mind their focus on the future. I think a lot of it is actually correct. But I honestly think that Blackwell's is here because kind of like Engine One, they wisely spent their marketing budget on a proxy contest that's going to get a lot of press. And now we all know Blackwell's capital just the same way that Engine One needed a foil, they needed a target, and why not pick the biggest villain in the ESG space, ExxonMobil, and we all know Engine One now. So I applaud Blackwell's for that. It makes sense.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. But Tryon's the weird one here.
Tryon's the weird one.
There's been a lot of discussion about how Nelson Peltz for 2 years has been trying to work his way onto this board.
According to Disney, a combination of Nelson Peltz and Ike Perlmutter.
Yes.
Who Disney claims is the one that actually owns 79% of the Disney shares that Nelson Peltz claims to own.
He's lent his shares.
We'll get into that later because Ike Perlmutter has been fighting with Disney and Bob Iger for several years. But according to Disney, Nelson Peltz has tried to get on the board in some combination at Disney 27, I think it's 27 times over the last 2 years. He has been begging his way onto the board. Yeah. And let me just say this before I move on, is that here's my quick takeaway on the Disney board is that they are perfectly built for this. They must, I wonder if they must know all of the activist pirates that come out, all the billionaires that come after media, because my assessment of the Disney board is that they, pardon the sports metaphor if you don't know American sports, but they are built like the offensive line of an American football team, and their job is this. Their job is to protect Tom Brady at all costs. That is the only reason why they're there, right? There are these big hulking people who protect the beautiful Tom Brady. And Matt, this is what this board has been created to do at Walt Disney, is to protect the beautiful Bob Iger. Because let me tell you let me just tell you a few names on this board at Walt Disney, because I don't know that their skill sets line up at all with what Walt Disney represents. Because here, but here is the offensive line at the Walt Disney Company protecting beautiful Bob Iger. Mary Barra, she's the CEO at GM. Safra Katz, CEO at Oracle. James Gorman, former CEO at Morgan Stanley. And then you have Calvin McDonald, CEO at Lululemon. Mark Parker is the chair. He was the former CEO at Nike. And then you have, of course, a super director of all super directors, Derica Rice, who's been involved with CVS, Eli Lilly, Carlisle, Bristol-Myers Squibb, and Target. Matt, I think this board is created to fend off activist investor attacks because they know that Disney is basically the only target left.
No, I don't think that they're created for that.
I didn't add space in the show for you to disagree with me.
But I think you're right that they're an offensive line for Bob Iger, right? Like their job is to effectively allow Bob Iger to make all the decisions and do his thing. To
leave him alone.
Right? To leave him alone so that he can execute. That is often the job of most boards. But when you look at the skills of this board's primary skill is knowing each other. I mean, 100% of the board is connected through other boards or affiliations, which, I want to get into this because the Blackwells, Tryon, and Disney all put out decks.
Oh, so many decks. No one has ever seen so many. And for us, it's the big, beautiful decks of beautiful charts and graphs. And the great thing about it too, Matt, is that we discussed this morning, is that none of the data lines up. None of it matches. They're all contacting different data providers. They're talking to people on Mars who help them use a slide rule. We don't know what they're doing with their data.
They can't even agree on how badly the people underperform, much less who underperformed.
Yeah, they can't calculate simple TSR relative to TSR.
Blackwell's has a chart that shows like the connections between the board members, but leaves out 90% of the, like there's 3 board members on it and it just says they're personal friends and it's built off of news articles. Meanwhile, we can actually point to where they've sat on other boards or have friends in common through the data, right? So we know Blackwell's is right. This is a highly insular board. They're all connected and they all know Iger. We know they were handpicked by him,
of course,
anecdotally, but we can show that they know each other as well.
This is what we talk about with these boomerang CEO events, right? Is that when the former CEO either has control or has created the board in the first place, it's the perfect petri dish to have a boomerang CEO come back to, right?
But I do think that means it's not a board set up to block an activist, because actually when an activist starts picking at the board, they become obviously not qualified necessarily to be on this board, other than the fact that they know each other. Well, there are CEOs who know each other.
Okay, but this is the failing of Nelson Peltz, because to your point at the beginning of this segment, Matt, is that their campaign is restore the magic, when it was even worse. Yeah, which smells a little bit like MAGA, like Make America Great Again, because it seems to be nodding back to when Disney was whiter, I suppose, when there was less nonsense, let's not forget that the Walt Disney Company has also been a major target of the anti-woke American community, right? For dozens and dozens of reasons. Not only Ron DeSantis, but dozens of whack jobs have attacked them for hiring non-white actors, for woke interpretations of stormtroopers, whatever nonsense you want to hear, they've done it.
I mean, that is definitely an underlying thing for
absolutely.
And I don't think Tryon is MAGA. I just think there's this concept of like going backwards to what?
I'm not suggesting
the world isn't backwards.
I'm not suggesting this is purely a political fight, but the proof, the facts will show you that Nelson Peltz is and was a friend of Donald Trump, is an active donor to the Republican Party. I mean, it's worth noting that part is true.
I think that part is true, but I think it also belies a misunderstanding. So like Disney right now there's 2 class action lawsuits that are open about discrimination on wages, discrimination against women in the workforce, and they're incredibly sensitive to the needs of their employees. That's why the Don't Say Gay bill was such a big thing under Chapek, and he screwed it up, right? And on the board, you have Mary Barra, who refused to meet with the union's GM when they were lobbying for a new collective bargaining agreement.
But they did make a deal with. She did make a deal with them this time. Yeah. They made a deal with the UAW,
but fought them first,
yes,
right?
Of course. Lost billions of dollars by holding them away. Yeah.
It's not exactly like you have, board members who understand the dynamics, nor do you have an activist who understands the dynamics. If the goal here is to all right. This is where I want to go. I want to go into what they're asking for, what the campaigns actually are saying, because they're very similar. There's a lot of overlaps and there's a lot of nonsense, I feel like, layered in.
All right, let's start with we'll start with Tryon.
So let's start with Tryon, right? Tryon's restore the magic, and they're basically saying they want to even saying it out loud.
The name is funny to
ridiculous.
me. Yeah.
But they basically want to leverage the flywheel. They talk all over about the flywheel. The flywheel is just movies, TV, merchandise, rides, video games. Basically, they're all just circular machine of I put out a movie, I can put out a show on TV about it, I can make a action figure around it, I do a ride at a park around it, and then it's a video game, and it's self-perpetuating, constant self-marketing and self-referential. And they talk a lot about in their deck the awesome IP and the customer loyalty, and how basically this board is the reason why Iger has a whole bunch of power and shouldn't, and they've made terrible acquisitions and distractions, and they've been involved in all this stuff. And there is the unspoken word in there, which is wokeness. They talk about the failure of the creative side of the business, and how like all the movies are flopping and they're not reading their customers properly. What they're effectively saying is, right?
Like it's like a Bud Light reference there.
It's sort of like the finance speak for woke.
Well, and let's not forget that the two nominees are two of the crustiest, oldest white dudes that you could find. Like they almost comically found two villains in a modern day Disney movie, right? It's Nelson Peltz, who we all know as the crotchety activist billionaire, and then Jay Rasulo of all people, who used to be the CFO of Disney, I think he retired in 2015. Before that, he was the head of parks, right? So that seems old fashioned. And his media experience, Matt, is that he is on the board of a radio company, iHeartMedia, radio. This is the future, but this is the future, according to Tryon, is to hook your wagon to a guy who's on a board of a radio company.
No, but it's not the future. It's the glory days.
It's the past, exactly.
That's what they're talking about.
But this is why it's such a funny, I find Tryon to be such a funny fail. And before you move on, I want to tell you that my other takeaway that I skipped over at the beginning is that the day that Disney and Bob Iger won this contest is this day. The day it did a filing with the following headlines. Okay, it filed with a proxy statement with these headlines. Bob Iger just got the backing of Walt and Roy Disney's heirs in the proxy fight with Nelson Peltz. Disney heirs line up against activist investors. Disney's heirs snub activist investors and throw their support behind Bob Iger. Disney family rebukes Nelson Peltz, praises Bob Iger and Charlotte. End of campaign. You're trying to restore the magic. This incredible, nostalgic Americana brand of Disney, and Bob Iger lines up the entire Disney family to say, no, we're with Bob.
Yeah,
I think I'm sorry. I think he won that day.
But
because Nelson Peltz doesn't offer any solutions.
Well, that's the problem, right? The fixes are like, so what you're really asking for is, the Disney brand used to mean like family in that sort of traditional Americana, apple pie, white middle America sense, right?
Sure,
like
1982, sure.
But Disney was forced to, over a decade, expand the definition of family if it wanted to expand its customer base. It is like the reason why the anti-woke focus on Disney is because you all of a sudden have movies that have people of color and gay people in it, right? Like, and now all of a sudden nobody likes it.
You mean the modern day American family? That is what a family is in our country.
Exactly.
Love it.
That is part of what American families are.
Yes.
But the plan to restore the glory days by Tryon is a 4-part plan. The first part is corporate governance. And they say the fix is add Peltz and Rasulo, fix the succession planning, right? Which is obvious.
Yeah, we're already getting into weird like la talk. When you fix, you're fixing a process by how? How are you doing that?
They're just fixing it.
You're fixing
it. And here's another part of it: align pay with performance. You're just gonna do that. Like anywhere else in CEO America, that's actually happening. And they have one suggestion that's actually actionable, which is add a board level strategy committee. They add a
look. It's all fine, Matt,
and it has to have Peltz and Rasulo on it.
And honestly, that's the sticking point for me. I'm actually fine with Blackwell's. I'm fine with Tryon. I love these proxy contests. I think that this is why I hate dual class companies, because I think it's nonsense that there should be a dictatorship at any of these companies. But when you nominate yourself and Jay Rasulo, you've killed the story. You've killed the plot. Like
it is worth saying though,
it's a terrible strategy.
I agree with that entirely. Right, like but it is
Nelson Peltz is not known for. He knows nothing about media. Listen to their peers, Matt. This is some of their peers. Meta Platforms, Alphabet, Amazon. This isn't 1974. We're not staring at a poster of a Dalmatian anymore.
But the amazing part is, even Tryon, the reason why they're getting in here to fix it is because shareholder returns have been abysmal and debt is high from the Fox 21st Century purchase, and you can see demonstrably that like the shares have underperformed the S&P. Great, you can see that. But even Tryon can't agree how much and who is underperforming, because Tryon says that Iger has returned 221% since the year 2000. Meanwhile, the S&P is up over 300%. Mm-hmm. But Blackwell says that Iger's up 20.7%.
Yeah.
And they're only focused on 2022 and beyond. They don't even look before that, and saying he slightly underperforms the S&P. Meanwhile, Disney says that for Iger's full tenures, it is 728% up. How can Tryon get a number that's 221% up and Disney get 728% up?
But let's be clear here. And I'm hoping that investors know this at this point. Nelson Peltz, just like Carl Icahn, his game is simple, and his track record proves it. You can see in his tenure at all these companies he's attacked. His game plan here is to pump up the share price in the short term, but with a lot of bluster and storytelling and look at what we did and we're restoring the magic, and then to get out. To make his money and get out. And you know how he proves that, Matt? He has no long-term plan to save Disney other than to be better than Netflix, and let's go back to 1947. That's it. That's his plan.
Except that his tenure on boards where he sat betrays the fact that they almost all go down.
That's true.
Go up.
And Disney and Blackwell's do a good job of showing that Nelson is a bit of a wizard from the Wizard of Oz.
So if Tryon's saying like, okay, do some more corporate governance stuff, and really it's just put Peltz and Rasulo on the board. They also want to insist on a strategy for Netflix-like margins. What is that? Insist? I insist you make more money. And by doing that, what they want to do is change the org chart, and effectively they say right size, which is today's euphemism for layoff. They want to lay off a lot of people right size the company.
I will say this ironically: Reed Hastings, CEO Emperor, has said that Disney really is its only competitor in this world. And don't forget, there's like 4,000 streamers. So they're clearly doing something right.
Not only they
to leave the magic from behind and go forward, right?
Even in Blackwell's presentation, they're saying like Disney needs to reduce churn in Disney Plus, like they're streaming. Mm-hmm. And they show a chart, and it shows that Netflix has like 2.3% churn, and Disney has 4% churn, and everyone else is worse.
Yeah.
As in, there are only two companies who are doing this
That's why. That's why.
Psychotic.
That's why. After spending so much time with this, I suddenly just realized that this is just about billionaires wanting to be involved with media. Because at the end of the day, I don't know that there's all that much wrong at Disney. I mean, again, like what Bob Iger has done after a tumultuous '90s. They had their own. The '90s had their own contests and wars and CEO succession problems. What Bob Iger has done basically is restore the brand as being
the magic,
probably the most probably the most trusted brand in the world. And I don't understand Nelson's perspective other than that he just wants to be a part of something cool.
here I think is the secret piece of this, okay? Because the third piece of his plan is to address the issues at the quote a creative engine, and that is adding a board-led review of studio operations and culture.
That's scary.
Doesn't that sound like a billionaire who wants to sit there and say this is too woke?
Worse.
I don't like that. Doesn't
Yes, I was gonna say
that what it is?
Yeah, and it's because it sounds worse than just a billionaire weighing in on art. It does sound like a MAGA billionaire weighing in on what it deems as political art. Like it just sounds like a nightmare. An absolute
when you
nightmare to
add
me.
culture. Like it's not just ops. When you say culture, you're talking about something else. And then finally they say, a strategic refocus, which is effectively giving investors more specific targets and making digital ESPN more profitable. Effectively, they're saying things that literally Disney put in every single deck that they've put out for the last 3 years.
And all things that if you're a big shareholder, which, Nelson is, that you could bring to Disney, like in your, large corporations meet with their biggest shareholders regularly. These are all issues you could bring up. You don't need to find some director on a radio company's board and try to get on the board with him. And it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary.
The underlying thing here is,
what is it?
Trian is saying Peltz and Rasulo are the people to make this happen.
They're going to restore the magic.
They're going to do that. They're going to do. Disney has not been able to execute on their plan. We have a very similar plan with more words. We include like overseeing some of the studio stuff at the board level, but otherwise, put Nelson on the board and we're winners again. It's basically what he's saying, with no demonstrable track record that is true.
And just so you know, that Disney's perspective on this is, and now we can talk about Ike Perlmutter. So Ike Perlmutter was a former executive at Marvel. He has had a notably fraught history with Bob Iger. It's all been publicly documented. So Disney is saying that Perlmutter was against such things as like the film Black Panther and Captain Marvel, both huge successes. That Perlmutter is a friend with Jay Rasulo and was so upset that when Bob Iger told Jay Rasulo that he would not be COO in 2015, that Ike Perlmutter responded that you broke my heart.
Oh.
So, in other words, the business press, Disney, is basically summarizing this fight as Ike Perlmutter is still mad about something that happened 10 years ago, and
Nelson Peltz wants to be on the board as an 80-year-old billionaire, and Ike Perlmutter has the shares and the anger to make it happen and get his buddy Jay Rasulo on the board.
Continuing a big bro-y billionaire war,
which makes Blackwells look like geniuses.
Let's talk about Blackwells. I want to talk about Blackwells because you're right, because Trian's Restore the Magic campaign is so laughable. Their filings are so terrible. Again, you're right. There is a MAGA scent to it. I'm not saying it's explicitly MAGA, but there's just a lot of weird flywheel talk. And let's go back to 1949. I don't really understand it, but Blackwells, they come out looking pretty adult in this whole conversation.
Yeah, they look more adult. Let's say that, right?
Well, look. Let's talk about their proposed nominees, because when I squint, which I do a lot, I don't hate it. I don't hate their nominees. I'm not saying they're ideal. I'm not saying they're perfect, but I think they're going in the right direction at least. Can I just say that? And let's talk about them. They are Jessica Schell. She was an executive at Warner Brothers Home Entertainment, including being involved with planning and development of virtual reality stuff. In fact, she used to work at Disney. So, look, it's not bad, right? A better response than Jay Rasulo. I'll say
better
that.
Than that, yeah.
You have Craig Hatcuff, who is he's a real estate guy, and I'm okay with that. You told me yesterday that 70% of Disney earnings come through their parks. So having a real estate guy makes sense.
Yeah.
And then you have Leah Sullivan. Yeah, whatever. She's a founder, CEO. She founded TaskRabbit. Fine. She's in technology.
I think they wanted venture eyes on it.
Sure.
Like scaly growth.
She's involved. After TaskRabbit, she does VC with tech companies. Fine. Whatever. I think they're on the right path.
But what I think actually is what Blackwells gets right is the failures of Disney, where Disney needs to go.
Sure.
In fact, their whole deck is the future of Disney, and they talk about one of the biggest failures that stuck out to me is Disney does not have a CTO at the same level as the other C-suite,
Okay.
right? A chief technology officer who can bring the technology stack under one person
Sure.
and one group, right? Like there's like that
Makes
feels
sense.
like a simple idea, right? Like
Yeah.
add a CTO whose job it is to gel all this crap you've got going on in multiple
with you.
technologies. And they talk about a lot of the same things Trian does when it comes to the creative process without the mega tent. They don't say, let us get involved. They effectively say, what you need on the board is a media executive.
Yeah.
Which, when you look at the board now, you have to wonder why there's no media executive,
Sure.
except to consolidate that skill with Bob Iger.
It
Bob
puts-
Iger's the only
we've
guy who can go in the
Talked
room
about
and
this
talk about it.
over and over again. It seems to be how modern day large cap American companies operate, right? Is do everything you can to put the power in their hand, but not only by compensating them in a like they're kings, but create boards that just lets them control everything. Lets them do everything.
Like, can you imagine walking into a Disney board meeting and Bob Iger's talking about the movies that they think are going to, the media that they're working on and why he thinks it's big, and raising your hand and saying, well, Bob, I actually have a suggestion. Like, can
Yeah.
you imagine
Well,
that if
that's-
you're the CEO of Lululemon?
This is why I say the board is constructed only as an offensive line to protect Bob Iger, because what I picture is that I can't think of a busier woman in America than Mary Barra. What I picture is her
Yes.
on her phone getting texted that another self-driving cruise car has hit some child in San Francisco and she's putting out that fire. There's no way she has the time and
She's
energy
worried
to
about
spend
Black Panther 3.
strategizing about VR ESPN Plus in 2028 and the revenues that are going to be generated because of that. I'm sorry, but that board is just there to protect Bob. They're not there for strategy.
So Blackwell's recognizes that the flywheel thing is
That's
it's
my
not
favorite part
it's-
of all this. The
It's
flywheel.
it's not like they don't actually focus a tremendous amount of time on it, except to say that technology should enable it to grow faster or be
Okay.
bigger. And they
Sure.
talk about sports, live sports. They talk about
which Disney is doing well with ESPN.
with virtual reality, augmented reality,
Yep.
bundling all the packages together.
Sure.
And they talk about having a more asset light approach to creative, which actually
I don't know what that means. Go,
it
sure.
means don't spend so much on big stars and big franchises that, focus on also diversify to movies that don't take a lot of money to make but have great stories, which is a classic Disney approach, right?
Sure.
But they stay out of the board should lead this, except to have a media person on the board who's seen it before. That seems actually reasonable to me. Doesn't it seem reasonable?
Yes. What I think is awkward about Blackwell's is they seem to have entered this contest basically to fight Nelson Pelt. It's almost like they have two reasons for entering this contest. One, to get notoriety, which they're getting, and again, hats off for them. I think it's a very smart way to spend your marketing money because even if they put out a huge marketing campaign, I still wouldn't have heard of Blackwell's Capital. Now I'm going to remember them forever, just like Engine One. But the other thing I think is that maybe they just saw how terrible Nelson Peltz and Jay Rasulo are and were, and the Restore the Magic campaign was horrible. And they just jumped into it to basically help Bob Iger fight it off. Because remember, when they first jumped into this, they said that we're not targeting Disney directors. We support the Disney board. In fact, we are for creating
They're adding directly.
bylaws to add members
Yeah.
to the boards, right? So they have a very strange position in this contest, right? Because they're not really fighting. They seem to be fighting Nelson Peltz more than they're fighting Disney.
Well, this is where I think they're fighting with Disney a little bit, which is to say, like, there's also no real you have the CEO of Oracle, fine, but you don't have AI, VR, AR tech people on the board either. And you have a real opportunity. In fact, in the Trian deck, there's 130 pages, of which 20 are about how the board sucks, and the
Which I
other
like.
110 pages are about how Disney didn't get enough performance, right? Like they didn't make enough cash, they didn't pay enough dividend, they didn't do their TSR is down. In fact, there are like 17 slides that say TSR is down in just different ways. I don't know what the point is of that.
As a quick tangent to what you're saying, here's why I hate attacking Nelson Peltz and Tryon. I love them for that deck because they spent over 20 pages rightfully trying to articulate their position on why the board sucks. And I think it's important to focus on boards at all of these companies, whether you're having a proxy contest or not. I think you should be doing this in your investment strategy. I think you should be doing this when you vote. So I actually, hats off to Nelson Peltz for spending time. I'm not saying I agree with his articulation of why the board sucks, but I like that he's trying. Because I think this is why I know that we're on the forefront of the next generation of ESG data, because this is where it starts.
But I prefer the specificity of Blackwell's when it comes to strategy, coupled with the board doesn't have the skills to accomplish this. Right?
I'm with you. Yeah.
Because they're saying, like, they said things like, which I saw nowhere in Tryon, like, why can't you use AI to optimize park crowd management or like access and timing, or use spatial computing and algorithms to effectively, they're using the concept of nudging, right? Like, why don't you nudge people in the way that, like, when you're doom scrolling on TikTok, it's just taking things you like and nudging you towards things that will addict you. They are thinking of the Disney flywheel, so to speak, in that way, right? Which I don't think Iger hasn't thought of.
We don't know that Disney's not thinking about these things, but I agree that these are sound strategy.
But it's not on the board.
Thoughts. That's where you're absolutely right.
On the board.
I think the Disney board is terrible. Honestly, I think that I think there's a lot of talented people on the board, but I think it is ill-suited for such an important media company.
Let's jump to that. Let's go right to the board, because otherwise we're going to go 6 hours.
I'm already exhausted.
Which we can, okay?
Yeah, get into the board.
I want to talk about, because you brought up, we'll come back to skills. Let's do performance
The offensive
first,
line,
right?
that is the Walt Disney board.
Let's do performance first. And I want to break performance into 3 distinct categories. Well, 2 distinct categories. One has sort of 2 parts. We measure market cap value add for every single director, which is really simple. The influence of a director, multiply it by the total change in the market cap of the company they're sitting on. Okay. Yeah. Then by doing that, you can say, this is how much this director is responsible for adding value to the company.
Yeah.
Just pure market cap. Okay. And you can do that across all their companies, just add it up over time. And we have that data back to 2018. You can do the same thing, that same concept, that's across all the companies that they're on, but you can do it at one company. So in this case, we're going to say, how much value add have these directors actually have at Disney? And we're going to do that mostly to answer the Tryon Blackwell's problem of no one can agree how these directors actually performed. Well, there is a way. We've built it. It's there. It's uniform. It's standardized. You don't need to make it up every single time. It's there. Because the third way is a TSR batting average.
Okay.
All right. So these are the 3 ways we're going to talk about. As a group, Disney's board has actually added, since 2018, $13 billion to Disney's market cap.
Since 2008. Since 2018.
Since 2018. However, everywhere else the board members have been, they've added $91 billion of market cap across all those companies. Meaning, this is a board that is actually good, just not at Disney. Okay. That's what you're saying, right? You're saying these are talented people. These are high-performing individuals. But the problem is they're on the Disney board where you're not able to maximize what they're best at.
Let's not forget what has happened, though, since 2018. And one is a disaster of a succession policy. So I'll agree with anyone there who calls out the board for being bad at succession planning, which doesn't surprise me considering they're all basically current CEOs who don't want succession planning. They want to stay in their jobs forever. But the other thing that happened was the pandemic, which and Bob Iger left at the beginning of the pandemic and handed off the company, I guess, to the wrong CEO and Bob Chapek. But But when 70% of earnings come in through parks and parks are shut down, I mean, it doesn't surprise. What I'm trying to say is it doesn't surprise me that Disney it took a while to catch its breath, right? I mean, there was 2 years where things were really churning. It didn't have the luxury of being a Netflix where the entire world was now stuck on their
brick
couch.
and mortar. Right.
So I'm just putting it into context here.
Like they're going to have a permanent problem because of the flywheel. The flywheel was an anchor during the pandemic, right? Because you had so much brick and mortar that you had to maintain and so many more employees. Like Netflix could cut 20% of its staff and still get you Deadpool 2, to stream at home. Right. That's not a problem. But they're going to be compared to the fact that the average cap value added by boards in the movies and entertainment industry since 2018 at the same time is $32 billion. So Disney board adds $13 billion. The rest of the industry boards add an average $32 billion.
But what I'm guessing, though, is that those companies who relied on old-fashioned experiential entertainment, either going to the movies, going to a theme park, going on a cruise,
did worse.
Yes, exactly.
They did worse. That's absolutely correct. Which is why like all these comparisons matter. The nuance and context here matters. Disney was better off if you can compare them to Universal, who has both.
Why? And yet another reason why an activist investor campaign of restoring the magic is absolute nonsense, right? I mean, what are we talking about here? What is the date of the magic that he's trying to replicate, by the way? Is it during the pandemic?
I think it's pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic. What year?
Post.com.
Who was president then? What are we trying to do? Were there smartphones? Did the internet exist? I don't know.
But the evidence of this is when we look at an individual director level, no one can hold a candle to how bad Bob Chapek was. He shed $28 billion in cap value.
Okay, but during a rough time.
And he made some bad decisions. At the beginning of the pandemic. He didn't help the situation.
Right.
But because timing is everything. Amy Chang and Calvin McDonald basically started at the same time Chapek did, and it didn't help, right? Like they had negative value also.
I want to remind you how we covered Bob Iger stepping down at Disney at the time on our show, Business Pants, was that Bob Iger read the same reports we were reading. It was like, I got to get out of here. I don't want to be involved in this. Like, this is a mess. I don't want to run Walt Disney at 72 years of age during a global pandemic.
Yeah. I mean,
with
we saw
Donald
it coming.
Trump as the president. So it's like,
coming.
Absolute shit show.
But and this is where Tryon actually picked the right director. One of the worst performers on the board is Lagomasino, who lost $2.6 billion in cap value.
She's been on the board
herself.
since 2015. Yeah, she's 74 years old.
9 years of tenure at this point.
Yeah.
But I would say that Peltz does not have a good sense of self because Iger is by far the top performer of the Disney board since 2018, having added $93 billion in cap value on the Apple board and the Disney board by himself.
Well, he's not targeting Bob Iger. He's just trying to piss him off, I guess. But he's not trying to vote him out.
No, but he is trying to replace Lagomasino and Michael Froman with Peltz himself, who's added $6.3 billion in cap value across all the boards. He's been on 7 boards since 2018. He's added $6.3 billion in cap value across 7 boards. And in fact, 90% of that is just Procter & Gamble. He is effectively market beta or negative if he's on your board. You do not get a bump from getting Nelson Peltz on your board. He would rank 6th on the Disney board since 2018, and Rasulo has lost $177 million, would rank 16th, and Hatkoff would be 14th. What magic are we restoring? Restoring the magic of doing no performance? Like the mediocrity?
Well, maybe we're restoring the magic of a very egotistical and selfish activist billionaire investor trying to make money in the short term while not caring about the long term of a company that they're investing in. And maybe that's the magic we're trying to restore.
Well, which sort of gets us to this TSR question. The TSR batting average for the entire board, only 3 of 13 directors, one of whom is D'Souza, who's leaving the board at the AGM, rank below average. They're all average.
It's very average.
There's nothing to see except average everywhere. The top performers, Calvin McDonald, the Lululemon CEO, at 633 batting average for TSR. Peltz is almost exactly average, 494. In fact, Rasulo, if he joins the Disney board, would come in as the worst TSR performer in the last 6 years.
Okay.
He would be the worst. So I don't know what we're restoring in this respect. When it comes to performance, Disney is actually right. They are basically average performers on this board, not horrible, but they're on the wrong board for this company, which is where Blackwell's and Tryon are right.
Yeah.
Everywhere else, they're better. They're better than average. On Disney, they're mediocre.
Hey.
And they're supposed to be, if Bob Iger is going to be effectively running this as a de facto dictator.
This is where I agree overall. I definitely agree that there is room for refreshment on this Disney board. I don't ascribe to the exact tactics that Blackwell's and Tryon are. I don't think it should be elevated maybe to a proxy contest, but yeah, they're both right. Although I'll say that I think Blackwell's nominees make a lot more sense.
Well,
we're getting close to an hour here, so.
Let's just do skills quickly, which is to say, if we agree with Blackwell's, which is the future requires new technology, some new ways of thinking about
it.
And putting, not that you need to meddle, but that you need those people on the board to provide the guidance. And actually, this is a board that is 100% connected to one another. You need to break some of that up. Like everyone can sort of agree with that.
You don't need it all. It's redundant.
I think Bob Iger agrees, right? Like I actually think strategically Disney agrees too, but they just disagree that the board needs to change to achieve it. Where as an investor, I think it does, right? This is the proof is in the pudding when, according to Disney's own skills matrix, when you exclude Bob Iger from the board, there is only 11% of the board influence has any media background at all.
And
11%.
And I'm guessing one of those is a director who was just appointed basically as a defense against Tryon.
Ago. Yes.
Right? That's the former CEO at Sky, which is owned by Comcast, and that's Jeremy Durock.
That's right. That's right.
DeRocher.
And in fact, when it comes to technology experience, it's almost exactly the same. If you consider Oracle to be your technology experience, less than half of the board has any sort of technology experience.
It's not great
either.
It's not great. You have a little bit with Amy Chang. You have a little bit with
Amy Chang and
Carolyn
Zafra
Everson.
Katz.
She was at Meta Platforms.
Yeah, kind of, right?
Yeah,
there's a lot of
adjacent.
Kind ofs.
Yeah, no, Matt. This is why I started the segment by saying that I think this board was created as a defense to Bob because their skill sets they're terrible. It's terrible.
It's not. It's just not a right fit. And
no.
And then if you're going to talk about skills,
especially considering that Bob Iger, we know, will be retiring soon. I mean, his contract has been extended to 2026, but we all know, this is the elephant in the room, he is going to be leaving people. He can't stay forever. Believe me, he's tried to leave.
This is where the Tryon effort here becomes even more
laughable. It's laughable.
It's laughable.
It's terrible.
As soon as you look at skill sets, it's laughable because it's like Rasulo. They say he has media experience, and like you said, it's a iHeartRadio. He's on the board of that. And can you name a CFO whose legacy was creative? Is that it's antithetical to the job?
It doesn't exist.
So there's just no way that the Tryon nominees here fit at all. Peltz and Rasulo don't fit at all.
I tell you,
Hatkoff is the one with iHeartRadio, and I don't think he fits either. He fits either.
Not Hatkoff. Jay Rasulo is in iHeartRadio.
Is it Rasulo in iHeartRadio? Oh yeah,
Craig Hatkoff
is in the REITs.
They give This is okay. This is a point of contention. I have to laugh at this a little bit. All the Blackwell's nominees actually have slight problems to me. First of all, according to Disney itself, Jessica Schell wouldn't even be considered independent because her brother
that's a problem.
Or entities with which he is affiliated have ongoing contractual business with Disney. Craig Hotkoff, they're trotting out as someone with this important media experience because he co-founded the Tribeca Film Festival. I got to tell you, the Tribeca Film Festival was co-founded actually by Jane Rosenthal and Robert De Niro. Craig Hatkoff was married to Jane Rosenthal at the time. So I'm calling bullshit on that one. And Leah Sullivan, I got nothing against TaskRabbit. I know IKEA bought it like 5 years ago, whatever. I don't know much about it. But I will say that her computer science, her tech expertise, whatever you want to call it, she got a degree in 2001, right? Which is a long time ago. But she got a degree
in math and computer science.
In mathematics and computer science in 2001 at a college which at the time did not even offer a computer science major. They didn't offer that until 2017. So I'm just saying, like, I'm not here to like tear apart their slate, but there's, it's not the perfect slate, which I already said. But
no,
anyway,
it's not. But it does
way
get
better
you
than
to the
way
vote
better
recommendation, right?
Yeah, come on, let's get to it. We're already an hour in the show.
All right. So I think in the end, there's some obvious. I think it's obvious you vote against Tryon. I mean, there's no way Peltz and Rasulo make sense on this.
And
board,
look,
ever.
I think Tryon. They already shot themselves in the face on this one because their Restore the Magic campaign is terrible. Especially at a future facing company that is competing with meta platforms of all and Alphabet, because their nominees suck. Their Restore the Magic campaign sucks, and I really think that Bob Iger won over shareholders the day that he announced that all of the Disney heirs were supporting him, because that's the whole campaign. For Nelson Peltz
campaign,
which is dig up Walt Disney and put some Gatorade in him because that's the magic we need, right? So Bob already has the family, so we don't need Nelson Peltz. So I agree. I think it's going to be dead. The other thing I was going to say is that when Blackwell's entered into the campaign, I think they've done a great job.
They really
Nelson
have
Peltz.
done a good job.
Yeah,
really good job of dissecting it. And which pains me to say that I think you vote against Hatkoff and Sullivan too. I don't think they fit. They're not complementary to this board in the way you need them to be. But that means I do think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jessica Schell is the closest thing that's up for nomination that you get.
I think
to
it's a good pick.
Plus media.
Good pick.
She'll have an activist level of influence, right? Because she got put there by activists. Investors will be able to say, like, we're putting this person there despite your reservations. You don't want her there. She has experience that Iger can't totally ignore.
Hey, she worked at Walt Disney in the 90s. So there you go.
And she's going to break up the 100% connected board, right? Like it cannot be 100% connected because she got shoved on there.
Well,
I think if she feels empowered to raise her hand, she actually can be the beginning of sort of turning the Disney board boat to the future. I actually think Blackwell's is right about it.
I always see this as a bit of a long-term play, the board refreshment. So I'm a big fan of targeting like one director per year, and I think she's a good choice but I think the next 2-3 years, I think you all keep going with this premise.
Well,
next year you want to flip another seat. And you're right to focus on skill sets. That's what you're trying to just.
Well, I think that's correct.
Because as we pointed out, they've already done a great job. This is a female-led board, female power. So it's really just skill sets you need to focus on at this point.
But I don't think what you want to do is keep all of Disney's board members either. I think you don't want to expand the size of the board. I actually think you want to vote out either Derica Rice or Mel Lagomasino.
Derica Rice is sort of pointless. He's a super director. He's there to play offensive line. I don't know why we need him. The other thing I was going to say that I pointed out to you earlier is that do we really need the CEO of both a Nike and a Lululemon?
I don't think
we need
I think
two
Parker is
sportswear.
next year.
I mean, ridiculous.
I think Parker is next year, and I think
Fine.
Parker's next year mostly because it's going to be Parker, Gorman, and Iger who have the succession planning conversations.
That's great.
Parker left Nike, and there was an active succession plan. Gorman now famously had a succession plan that people seem to like, even though we forget that he had two people shivving each other for the job and had to pay them the same
overpay.
amount. He overpay. It was
but I will say this: Calvin McDonald's only 52. Mark Parker is 68. Calvin McDonald, a lot of our performance data is a high performer.
He's the top performer. He's he's the top performer on this board.
Next year, I think you're right. You target Mark Parker.
I think Derek Rice or Mel Lagomasino, and my preference would be get rid of Lagomasino. For 8 years, she has been part of a board that has had all of these problems, right? Like as rubber stamped Iger. I think Lagomasino in the short term, and next year you talk about Parker and Rice potentially as a pair to complete sort of a board refreshment, and you need to put in someone like Shell, who you're adding tech and media, and you need to like next year you're going to need finance and tech again. Because what you don't have is people who are saying stop taking on so much debt and doing so many acquisitions and actually try to run your company for a year, right? Like without buying something. It's fun. It's actually fun to do. So those are my recs. Vote for Shell, vote against Peltz, Rasulo, Hatkoff, Sullivan, and let's axe Lagomasino while we're at it. Do not increase the board size, which is one of the Blackwell shareholder proposals as well.
All right, so let's wrap up the show. If you actually want to know our perspective on the shareholder proposals, on Say on Pay, reach out to us. We actually have done that research as well, but I don't think we need to keep going with Disney. I think I like ending on supporting Blackwell's Shell, voting against all of the Trian directors, and what did you say? Who are we targeting on the Disney board again?
Lagomasino.
Okay, Lagomasino. So. Anything else you want to add to this? I think we've pretty much covered it.
I mean, there's a bunch of shareholder proposals. I say you vote no on every shareholder proposal, and honestly, pay is one of those things that I think you have to vote no on also.
Honestly, this year, I don't know if any of it matters.
I don't know that any of it matters.
So much noise at this company. I think,
But I think you vote no on everything else, and you just focus on the board because that's what's going to make the difference going forward.
That's the Proxy Countdown for the week of March 11th, 2024. Join us next week when we jump back into the alternative democracy pool, forever on the lookout for shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors. I think this week, Matt, really encapsulates that
the
phrase.
Wayward directors.
Just all of it. Shareholder sharks, floating band-aids, and wayward directors. That's the Disney proxy cage match right there.
I don't like that.